Being 7 o'clock, we'll get the meeting underway. This meeting of the Reading Municipal Light Department Board of Commissioners is being videotaped here at the RMLD's office at 230 Ash Street for distribution to the community TV stations in Reading, North Reading, Wilmington, and Linfield. The RMLD Board of Commissioners recognizes the importance of hearing public comment, especially tonight, and at the discretion of the chair on items on the agenda and not on the official agenda. We just ask that all questions or comments be directed to the chair and that everybody be polite and courteous. And tonight with our solar workshop, what we're going to do is after we have presentations, we will invite people to come and hopefully it's not too intimidating, actually come up to the podium so that you can stand there and ask. That way your question and your comment is going to be heard by everybody, including the cable TV folks. If you ask it from there, then nobody will be able to see or hear what you're saying. So, can you hear me? You can't hear me? Okay.
Hold on a second.
Microphone's got. That's just for TV.
Do we have AV problems? Colleen has left the room. Well, you know, it's a cloudy day, so with apologies to Tom for this joke, we're going to change the topic to battery storage, not solar.
Or hydro. We could do hydro.
Hydro, thank you. We should have worked on the bad joke from the beforehand. Yeah. Yes. Okay, thank you. So we're working, I think we have an AV issue.
Well, there's no microphone. That's just for the TV. You just got to be loud.
Okay. So basically, we just started the meeting, and I'm just going to get started. My name is Dave Talbot. I'm the chair of the board, and my colleagues here are very happy to have you here for this solar workshop. I would like to just introduce the topic briefly and say that this is a little bit different than the usual meeting in that, you know, the point is to engage with the public in explaining policies, the institutional roles, and programs related to solar generation. As you probably all know, in theory, our energy future can be based on renewables and nuclear coupled with storage and with a lot of efficiency mixed in and get us away from primarily fossil fuel burning for all of what we do in our electricity generation and transportation. So this meeting is about the role RMLD can play locally within RMLD's business model. It's a complicated topic, and I know there's been some questions and confusion over the years about, you know, how do we do this, and it's more complicated certainly than just using electricity and RMLD buying and selling it. So in discussing, you know, the communications issues, you know, in discussing with staff, Colleen O'Brien, our general manager, and for Charles Underhill, who's our Director of Integrated Resources, who will be giving a presentation shortly to explain the programs that we offer and take many of your questions. And thank you for your help.
Lots of seats. Many seats right up front.
Welcome. Thank you. Just a couple of quick comments about, you know, there's a few different models for doing this, which Chuck will explain. You have residential, you can do solar on municipal property, like a school, or, you know, commercial industrial could do a solar project. The models can be different depending on the scale and the type of entity that's involved. A quick context, since we have some municipal officials in the room, thank you for coming. I'll give you a quick context on the municipal piece. You know, towns or cities that are doing this on public property, like a school. We have 351 towns or cities in the state of a Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Of these 351, 200 of them are doing some type of municipal-centric project in their territory. And this includes 122 have 2 or more systems. And of these, 20 of these communities are served by municipal light plants, such as RMLD. There's 40 of, not to get too into the weeds, but there's 40 municipal, or 41 or 2 in the state, municipal utilities like RMLD, and they serve 46 communities, towns, or cities. And so 20 of those have some type of municipal solar generation facility at the light plant or the town. At this time, we serve 4 communities, as you know: Reading, North Reading, Wilmington, and part of Linfield. And we have not yet, you know, there's a lot of discussions, but there's not yet been a municipal building solar array, either rooftop, canopy, or other. And the RMLD looks forward to assisting any municipality who might wish to pursue this and explore the feasibility. And Chuck will be explaining some of how that could happen. And now I'll just give you a quick bit of the structure of the meeting. Chuck, or the aforementioned Charles Underhill, Director of Integrated Resources, is going to give a presentation to walk you through these pieces. And then, most importantly, we're going to have a nice long period of time for questions and dialogue. And when we do that, just to reiterate, we'd have you come up and, first of all, I'd like to take the municipal questions first, meaning from the town's governments, then residential, and then others after that. So we'll kind of break it into those three chunks of questions. And we'd ask that you do come up to the podium and address your comments and questions from the podium, and try to keep it brief so we can have people all have a chance to ask questions. With that, I'll hand it to Colleen to sort of...
Okay. Yes, thank you and good evening. So glad everyone came. Nice big full house. I'm just going to turn it over to Chuck, but I just want to give a special thanks to Tracy, my assistant, and Joyce Mulvaney, our communications manager, and everybody else on the team that helped put this together. So thanks a lot, and take it over, Chuck.
We could move it out a little bit if you like.
So while Joyce is loading this, is there anybody that can't hear me? My voice carries. I have experience as a swimming official. I can yell down a 50-meter pool, and the kids will stop running. So good evening and welcome. As you know, the presentation this evening is on camera. If you want to come up and ask your question through the podium, that's fine. We also have an empty seat over on the other side if that's easier to get to. And I believe that Vivek is glad to share his microphone this evening with anybody that would prefer to ask their question from over there. What I wanted to do this evening was sort of level set everybody's expectations about solar. There have been a number of issues floating around solar for quite a while that affect the design of the systems that we build, the cost effectiveness of the systems, how we price incentives, and a whole slew of other things that occur with the solar market. So what I want to do is very briefly, I was told, go through a slide deck and sort of lay out the considerations that go with solar these days. So I'm going to figure out which button actually advances the slides and which ones turn it off and kill the computer for the evening. So I've broken this into 4 sections: solar economics and impacts, system examples, RMLD's own solar goals and objectives, and then current RMLD and other solar activities that are going on. So let's start with solar economics. The first thing is actually fitting solar to the load profile. And I've put together a case example this evening that shows what a residential load profile looks like and what a solar profile looks like. And in order to structure this example, I sized the solar system so that it would produce 9,500 kilowatt hours, which is the average number of kilowatt hours that a residential customer in Massachusetts or in RMLD's service territory uses. In fact, I took 1,000 customers, aggregated them up, and came up with a profile that way. So I'm comparing apples and oranges, and you'll be able to see how the profiles fit together, and then what the structure of the production and consumption looks like. So we also have a number of distribution utility options. We have what's called net metering every place else. We have consumer behind the meter generation here in RMLD. This is not sustainable if we do it on what most people understand to be net metering, which is the same price in and out. It costs money for RMLD to provide backup service to the solars, to bank the solar kilowatt hours, and to provide energy at night when the solar isn't operating. So there are costs that we need to recover, and there are strategies and structures that utilities are putting in place to do that. So this is the profile curve, and the blue line is solar production. This is for July, and what you'll see is the yellow line, when it is above the blue line, is when the solar location is consuming more power than it is using. And when the blue line is above the yellow line, the system is producing more energy than the customer is consuming. Over time, over the course of a full year, you actually use about 40%, 45% of the energy directly and immediately. The other 55% requires a banking activity to do. So it's over 50% over the course of a year requires the banking and the interconnection with the utility to be able to work. Now, these are all done to the same scale. So in July, we're looking at the output from a 6.3 kilowatt residential system. This is the load profile in December. And you'll notice that the solar production drops rather dramatically and narrows. You'd expect that because of the hours of darkness. And the load profile follows fairly closely to where it is in July. So this is where actually the consumers are using more of the resources from RMLD than they are actually producing from the solar system. So these slides will be available, but I put together a summary so that you can see how it goes out from month-to-month basis. The first column is the consumption for the average residential consumer. It totals about 9,500 kilowatt hours. The second column is delivered. The third column is received. The fourth column is the net, so that you can track what you would see each month on your banking statement and what would be accumulating in the kilowatt hours. At the end of the year, I've got a 25 kilowatt hour difference. So I figure that's pretty close to balanced and zero. So when we look at solar economics, one of the first questions is, what does it cost? And I went and got some national level data. Across the United States, the average installed cost per watt of a solar system is about $3.05. Here in Massachusetts, the average cost is $3.29. And when we look at the cost of just the panel, not including the labor, not including the inverter, not including the transformer, not including the electronics and controls, it runs about $1.05 per panel per year, or per panel.
Per watt.
Per watt, for just the panel. I'm sorry.
You want to move this over so you
Yeah, you can move it a little further up.
Can everybody still see the screen? How about now? I have a very warped sense of humor. I apologize in advance. So, over the last 5 years, we have seen at the national level a decline in the average installed cost per watt. It originally started at, well, this is 305, and it's dropped about 2% a year for each of the last 5 years. So there has not been a precipitous decline in the cost of solar panels. So it looks like we're getting to a relatively stable pricing structure. So when we talk about federal and state incentives, right now there is a federal tax credit that is 30% of the net project costs. That 30% ends in December of this year, and it drops to 26% in 2020. So it's about a 4% decrease in the value of the incentive on your federal tax return. Massachusetts tax returns are the lesser of 15% of the net project costs, or $1,000. The MLP Solar Rebate Incentive. This is a new program that was put together by the Department of Energy Resources, DOER. We are working in conjunction with them. In our service territory, we put $250,000 into the program. DOER is matching it. So we have a $500,000 kitty available in 2019 for us to develop solar projects under 25 kW per location. So that's sort of our resource pool for offering incentives. DOER has negotiated with everybody and come up with a rate of $1.20 per watt as the incentive to be paid to anybody installing a system. So it's based on the graded size of the system that you're installing. Maximum 25 kW project, and as I said, it's split 50-50, matching funds with the Commonwealth. This replaces the under 25 kW incentive that we currently have. The over 25 kW incentive stays in place. So we're matching the DOER contribution of 60 cents per watt. This is a one-year program, and then we will pay for over 25 kW up to $50,000 to, we call it commercial, but it's essentially non-residential, commercial and municipal systems that are being built. RMLD credits customers the monthly fuel charge for anything that is excess generation. So if you have a credit in any one month on the net amount, we pay the market price for it. So how does this sugar off when we put the cost of the project, the incentive that we offer, the federal tax credit, and the Massachusetts tax credit in there? Basically, for 2019, it is a 6.6-year simple payback on the avoided energy that's being used. Next year, 2020, because of the decrease in the value of the federal incentive, it will go to a 7-year payback. Excuse me. And if we look at an over 25 kW system, we're starting at a 7.7-year simple payback and going to 8.1. So that gives you the rough comparison in the way the programs are structured and the economic benefit that accrues to the smaller under 25 kW systems. So what are some of the impacts that we see to and from solar? The solar production across the United States varies. A lot of it is climate driven. Weather is a big part of it, cloud cover, precipitation, relative humidity. They all play a big part in it. We have when capacity and transmission peaks occur, the later they occur during the day and the later into the summer season they occur, the smaller is the contribution of solar to offsetting that peak. In 2018, the peak occurred August 28th, and the solar contribution from our two solar choice projects was just over 25% of what the project produced. So there's about a 75% derating, if you will, in the ability of a solar project to offset our system peak. We also have an issue with what I will call phantom load. Once a customer has installed a solar system and they're producing for their own need, that load becomes sort of invisible to us. But anything happens to that solar system, we have to step in and fill that need whenever it is. So it's kind of a phantom load for us, and we can't downsize our system for the new load levels that we're experiencing as solar penetrates more and more on the system. So we count on Hamid to oversize our distribution system in order to protect and be able to serve that what I call phantom load. There is another issue, and that is system efficiency. Solar contributes something called power factor. Everybody in here is over 21, right? Okay.
No, not everybody.
Step out in the hall, please. I'm just joking. I'm kidding.
Anybody who's had a glass of beer, how much foam do you really like with your beer? Hopefully very little. Nobody wants foam, right? All right. Well, that's the problem with solar, is solar adds foam to the glass. And so we have to provide correction on our system to get rid of that foam, that power factor. It's a piece of the system that we cover for so that we can reduce essentially the losses and put more volume of beer in the glass rather than foam. The other thing, by the way, is hours of darkness and how much we have the further north we go over the course of a year. So Hamid is currently working to identify how much solar we can put on each of our feeders. It depends on the length of the feeder, how much load is currently existing there. Right now, we've assumed 15%, and that is on the chart outside. A feeder, for those of you who are wondering, is essentially one of the distribution lines that comes out of a substation and wends its way all over town. So on each of those, and I think we've got 20 some odd feeders throughout the community, we have to look and see how much load we can put on each of them. So we start with a conservative assumption, and we evaluate what we can put out there without compromising pieces of our system. The other thing on solar, and this is big, location, location, location. Do we have any realtors in the place? There we go. Okay. How do you sell property? Location, location, location. Same thing in trying to sell solar. Location, location, location. What's the orientation of the house? Is it facing south? Is it facing southeast? Is it facing north? Where do you put the panels? What does the roof look like? What is the slope? So either if you've got a flat roof, you can angle the panels appropriately. If you've got a 612 pitch roof, you're kind of stuck putting them up on a 612 pitch. All of that affects the optimum angle at which those panels face the sun. And that affects the production capacity that they will put out. The other thing, and I know this is big and very popular in all four of the towns, trees. Everybody likes trees. Everybody likes nice, tall, shady trees. Everybody but solar likes trees, okay? They have a very dramatic effect. They cut down how much sun will actually strike the panels for a good part of the day. So shade is another one of those critical design factors. What happens when all of this is put together is that we sort of get a map that talks about how much sun will strike in different areas over the full course of a day, how much it gets diminished by relative humidity, some of the other factors, and we get a map that tells us how many kilowatt hours a day a solar system will produce around the United States. If you look on the map, Arizona and New Mexico are the hot spots for producing solar. Let me tell you how this translates. If you build a solar system in Arizona, it will produce kilowatt hours equal to 35% of the capacity of the system. If you build a solar system in New England, it will produce 16% of the capacity of the system. Now, if the systems both cost about the same, where would you rather build the system? Where you get twice the output down in Arizona. So that's the most economical place to build solar. Unfortunately, we're not in Arizona. So that gets factored into the economics, and it's one of the reasons that solar seems expensive in New England, because it is. It's per kilowatt hour of production twice as expensive as it is down in Arizona. And what's really bad is, you remember that 305 price and the 329 price? Arizona is what balances Massachusetts to get it to 305. They're down south of $3 a kW to install it. So it's a situation we deal with, and we just have to factor it into our planning. So per state law, no one can sell kilowatt hours in a municipal service territory, municipal light plant territory. This includes RMLD, it includes Peabody, it includes Danvers, it includes Braintree. Every place where there's a municipal utility, we have a state law right to aggregate the load and nobody can come in and sell. What that does is take some of the solar models off of the table. There were two companies that were selling solar products in Massachusetts. One was called Blue Wave. The other was Solar City. And if any of you had been to Home Depot or Lowe's on a Saturday, there are the Solar City folks trying to get you to buy. Their product, the way they offered it, was they would guarantee you a 10 or a 15% discount off of your current electric bill. And they would sell you the kilowatt hours at that discount. They can do that anywhere except a municipal light plant territory. But they're out telling people that the municipal light plants won't build solar. They won't take it. They won't accept it. Not true. We take a lot of it. We've got 7,000 kilowatts of installed solar capacity on our system right now. So we build it, but somebody's out there telling a story that isn't quite true. It just depends on the model. They weren't happy with our receptivity to their model, so they said, they won't take it. Well, not exactly. So there's a way around that for some customers who need it. Municipal light plant customers, including those in the RMLD service territory, either have to own or lease the facilities. Now, this becomes important if you are a tax-exempt customer like a municipal government, a church, a not-for-profit school like Austin Prep, where you got a 501c3 or some other tax exemption. You can't claim that 30% federal tax deduction. So you need to structure the deal a little bit differently. And I've done a couple of those deals so that we're able to get the tax credits over to municipalities and tax-exempt customers. It can be done. It just takes a little creativity to get there. So down here, I lied, I said 7,000, it's 7,655. I have here a slide, it's a little tough to read, but it does have on there the number of customers by town and the installed capacity of the solar systems by town. So we have 121 residential customers at 851 kW of installed solar capacity for residential customers in all 4 of the communities. Commercial customers, we have 17 accounts with 2,135.4 kW. Those are our behind-the-meter projects. Those are customer-owned generation behind the meter. We also have 3 projects where we buy the output directly. They are connected to our distribution system. And we buy the output, it goes into our mix, and we're currently working with the legislature to figure out how to count that towards our goals of reducing carbon emissions here in the Commonwealth. And that totals 4,709. So it is the biggest piece of the puzzle. Now, for those of you who wonder how a solar system is structured, this slide is pretty much a typical residential system. You see the 6 solar panels on the roof. There are protective and control devices next on the system, a junction box, and then we get to the inverter, which converts it from direct current to alternating current and lines it up with the cycles on our system. We're a 60-cycle system. That makes it synchronous with the system. It actually takes the feed from RMLD so that it can sync up the sine waves, essentially. And I know I'm speaking Greek. I apologize. Then we have a transformer that changes the voltage up to what's coming into the house. We have a disconnect switch. Makes the fire department very happy, just in case. And then this is a little bit different than what we actually use. We use 1 meter, that uses 2. So one measures the solar output and the other measures the house consumption and adjusts those. We just have one measure and we take the net of the in and out on it. So where are we? We have solar choice. We allow people to invest in solar panels in projects that the output is sold directly to us. We have 2 of those, Solar Choice 1, Solar Choice 2. We're working on Solar Choice 3, and I'm going to have some comments on that in just a minute. We are now doing the DOER Municipal Light Plant Rebate Program, where the incentives are a little richer for this year. We have commercial rebates. And then we have, as I said, the power purchase agreements, where we are buying the output from those solar facilities. And everything else is generation behind the meter. So where are we going now? As I said, we're looking at what I'll call a Solar Garden, Solar Choice Program. I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a second. We have an opportunity to explore some projects with Green Communities. Green Communities is a state-sponsored organization that is looking to go into municipalities and target energy reductions. Because we are a municipal light plant, the participation structure for that is a little bit different. But we are working with them. They have 2 sources of funding, one that they have collected from ratepayers in other communities. We're trying very hard to stay away from that money. That's somebody else's. But they also have regional greenhouse gas initiative monies that were left over from some penalties collected a few years ago. And some of you may remember a company called Volkswagen. Apparently, they did some no-nos on their emissions controls, and somebody determined that that was not a good thing, so they paid a penalty. Those funds are accessible, and we're looking to work with greenhouse communities for some grant studies to be able to develop some additional programs, including solar, with access to those monies. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI funds, were from Exxon oil overcharge monies. So we're going to put them to good use. We're going to try to anyway. So what's going on here in Massachusetts? What's the landscape look like here in Massachusetts? For municipal light plants, they are all moving away from what everybody thinks of as net metering, which is the same price in and out. It is not sustainable. We can't continue, and we begin to feel the effects the larger the programs, the solar programs, go. So we're coming up with changes to those models. What happens with that program, you start to transfer the costs from the people who put in solar to everybody else on the system. Initially, to get it going, that was reasonably acceptable. The dollar values were low, and it was a good social and community policy. But as it grows and as more people become interested in doing this, we have to reflect on where the impacts go. And pricing structures and rules that we have to follow in setting rates dictate that user pays, and we have to be cost equitable in things that we do. So we're going to fair rate design for people who are building solar or already have solar. We're looking at charging a facilities fee so that you're paying for access to our distribution system so that you can do that in and out banking that is 55% of the production of your solar facility. We are looking at a couple of pricing models for behind the meter. One is that the solar is separately metered, and we just buy the output from it at market price. The other, as I said, is that we have either a facility charge or backup service charge that gets used. Municipal light plants also purchase the output delivered to the distribution grid under power purchase agreements. That's basically a contract. It says we'll buy the output for 20 years. And we do that from a couple of the projects that we have on our distribution grid. There is an advantage to us from buying from those projects. If we buy them internally, that load doesn't show up on our ISO New England meters, and so we don't pay transmission expense on that, and we don't pay capacity cost on that. So we're able to pass those benefits through in the contract pricing. Makes it a little more attractive, okay? The other thing on Massachusetts solar programs, where a customer is tax exempt, we are working on leasing strategies. And the leasing strategy means that whoever actually builds and finances the project gets the tax incentives, and the lease price to the customer reflects the reduction in construction costs for that, and so the lease price is lower. So it's a way of passing that benefit along. So under the solar garden, solar choice concept, what we're looking at is we would build a project, either RMLD or a third-party vendor. That project would be sited someplace here in the service territory. RMLD would pay for the construction of the transformer, the inverter, I call it the nest, but it's essentially the panel blocks that you can mount them in, and then we will populate the system with solar panels. Those customers who wish to buy the solar panels, we would charge them the $1.05 per watt cost of the panel. They would then own however many panels are in the project, and each month they would receive a credit on their bill as sort of their return on the investment of the panels, and that return would be equal to the offset price in the market that we see from this, and we would recover a lease fee which would be equal to the cost of the project divided by 20 years. What that does, that brings the cost of people being able to get into the project, the initial upfront cost, way down. They're still paying the same costs for the transformers and the inverters and the rest of the equipment. They're just doing it over time. So we take 2/3 of the project, spread it out over 20 years. The other 1/3 is the cost of the panels that they pay up front. They're in, and they get a credit on their bill. So it's a way of knocking down barriers for people to participate in the projects. Because quite frankly, $15,000 to $20,000 is a little steep for a lot of people to pay. So we try to get that down.
Let him be.
So municipal solar opportunities. We have rooftop solar. That can be behind the meter, or it can be the location where RMLD puts a project including the solar choice. If we put it up there, we pay a lease fee to whatever municipal building it is for the use of the roof. So that's where the municipality gets some of its return back. And then we go ahead and construct the project and operate it and take the power off it. If it's behind the meter, the municipality has built the project, and we'll treat that like we would any other generation behind the meter. Third-party solar would work the same way, except this would be where the municipality would be able to work a lease agreement and sell the output to us, and in the lease agreement get credit for the federal tax. So there's all kinds of ways of cutting this one up that we think provide opportunity here in the community. So building owners in the private sector, this tends to be the commercial ones. We would encourage power purchase agreements wherever possible, because again, I don't want to have to deal with the phantom loads. I'd rather have it out on the distribution system. So we have to come up with a rate that looks like parity, and the customer really doesn't care which way it goes. They sell it to us. We have fewer issues to deal with. That would be my choice. But we'll also work on synergies with other RMLD energy resource programs. Well, that's a mouthful. What does that mean? We have begun this year a program that we call electrification. That means that we are looking to go into, for example, the transportation sector. We are looking to take gasoline-fired vehicles off the road and replace them with electric vehicles. We have committed to and gotten recognition votes from our governing body to acquire non-carbon resources for every electric vehicle that we bring on board, or for every heating, ventilating, and air conditioning system that we switch to heat pump. So if we switch to an electrically driven system, we will get non-carbon resources to support it. So that then is the synergies with other programs. We might as well take advantage of the things that we're doing in our community as well and get double bang for the buck. So I put a lot of numbers up in here, and anybody who grabs a slide deck will provide it. You can see the sources that I used. These are all reputable agencies. The first one on here, for those who are interested in residential solar, that first one is where you go to find out how the new program works and to fill out an application if you're interested in developing your own generation behind the meter program. If you want to find an installer, there's a reference for doing that. The next two are the sources that I used for national pricing information and information on how much a solar system will produce in various areas of the country. The presentation is done.
Thank you very much, Chuck, for that. Going up right, our general manager.
So because we're committed to paperless, Joyce will put this up on the website, so we'll be able to call it up and be able to read all the slide decks and everything, and we'll try to get that up tonight, okay?
Thank you, Colleen. And thank you, Chuck, for that. I think we're going to let people come up to the podium and ask their questions. Just a quick thing, I really especially appreciated your comments about trying to knock down barriers to residential adoption. One of the data points, we have 120 residences that have systems. It's actually, the 4 towns are actually among the lowest penetration rates in the state. And I think, the amount of attendance here suggests that there's a lot of interest out there, and I think we as a body would like to help reduce those barriers and join with you in that. So with that, as I said at the beginning, what I'd like to do is start with any questions that pertain to the municipal side, and then questions that are about residential, and whoever would like to speak and raise their hand, I'll recognize you, and you come up to the podium and ask your question from the podium. So with that, we have a question from Mark Doxer, who's on the select board in the town of Reading.
Thank you. Thought I would help kick it off. My name is Mark Doxer. I'm a Reading resident, member of the select board here in Reading. Question I have is, you talked about an RMLD project that might be there to work on an RFP to determine solar potential in the municipalities. And I would personally be very interested in learning more about how to do that, how to make that happen. And when it says RMLD project, does that mean RMLD would be kind of initiating, or would be willing to initiate that project?
Certainly from the governance standpoint, I would be in favor of that. I would defer to Chuck to answer the question.
The project that we would look at is if the towns, Reading and the other 3, are interested in a project where they would provide a rooftop for us to use as a platform, we would work to study the roofs in each of the towns to determine their suitability based on environmental factors like trees, and also have a structural engineer look at the underlying support for the roof to see what kind of loading it would be able to take. The objective would be to go through and identify suitable rooftops in each location, prioritize them, determine how much solar could be put on each, and then start moving forward. If the communities want to do behind-the-meter generation, then what we would do is help with how a lease structure would work. I've put a couple of them in place, so we can work with that. It's sort of a split approach to dealing with it, and it will depend on our level of involvement in the project.
Mark, did you clear on those 2 different types, the behind the meter versus is a generator that we'd own in effect?
In concept, yes.
Okay.
Because it would relate to how the town would evaluate those.
Yep.
Towns would evaluate. No.
Okay. So, but I think what I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that if the municipalities were willing to have the roofs be essentially host to a generating facility that RMLD would control and, purchase all the power or use as a generating source, then we would handle all of the RFP for that model.
That is correct. So if the towns express interest in working with us, we would pull together a proposal to be able to go out and do that. The size of and scope of the proposal would be a function of who was interested in going to the market for it. And then we'd make a choice as to whether we wanted to do it with RMLD resources or whether we wanted to turn it over to a third-party solar specialist. I can't give you too much more than that right now because there isn't a lot of structure to it until I get some feedback from the municipalities themselves.
And the quick follow-up, is there an advantage to scale? Like if there's many buildings, many towns, willing to do an RFP with many potential sites, would that be more attractive or more economical in theory, or don't we know?
Well, the larger the scale, the more communities that participate, the more likely we are to find significantly advantageous sites. Each site gets evaluated. We would use the same model that's available through DOER. There's a production evaluation model, and we would go through that and determine what the best opportunities in each community would be. So the more communities that participate, the more buildings that we bring into this, the better our likelihood of success.
Yeah, why don't you come up, Mark, just so everybody can hear? Yeah.
Also, when
Yeah.
you speak for the people in the back, you might want to stand up.
Really quick, how would communities indicate their interest? Would it be select boards communicating their interest to the commissioners, or how would it happen? How would you want it to happen to express that?
That's questions for, if you, I guess technically you're directing questions to the chair, and I'll say yes, please. If your body would like to let ours know, we will relay the message to Colleen and Chuck. But I guess that's up to you, right? Or is there a better answer than that, Chuck?
No, I think that's pretty accurate. I think to get the thing started, it starts at the policy level.
Yep.
And that would mean that each of the select boards, I don't know if the school boards would have a separate vote on this, or whether the town select boards control it, but an expression of interest from any of the governing boards with roofs in each of the 4 communities talks to Dave Talbot. I'm pretty sure he'll be receptive to hearing from you. Once that's done, provide the name of a designated contact for each of those. I would assume it would be the facilities manager in the school department, or the facilities manager in DPW for the rest of the facilities. And what we would do is start a contact process, get an assessment of what the available inventory is of roofs that might participate in that, go out and put together some sort of a scope of work that we could do in an RFP, pass that by each of the communities to make sure we haven't missed anything, get the appropriate outside entities involved, probably a structural engineer to assess the roofs, somebody to run the individual roofs through the horizon and total solar assessment, essentially. For those who would like to accelerate the process, I have a stack of business cards here, and anybody, residential, commercial, or municipal, is welcome to take one. I'm hoping that they all go away soon, because then I will be able to go to Colleen and tell her how effective I am. And
Need a new card with a new title, right?
well, yeah, new card, new title, more money.
Other questions on the municipal side? We have another from Vanessa Alvarado, who's also on the Reading Select Board.
As a point of clarification, there are no current solar installations on municipal buildings in any of the 4 communities?
That is correct.
What would an ideal solar installation look like, and what is the number of kilowatt hours that you would like to see coming from these installments, if you have one?
I mean, again, I'll defer to Chuck, but I think what Chuck just said was that this RFP would examine suitable sites and pick which ones are the best, and the more the merrier, and the better sites are the better sites if you have more to choose from.
Nothing on size in particular, but if I got the optimum site, it would be a 2-story building with no trees on the surrounding 5 acres, so that I had horizon to horizon. And it would be a flat roof structure so that I could angle my panels for optimum exposure in the appropriate direction.
And I believe, and you correct me if I'm wrong, the solar developers and the people who would be responding and setting this would have the tools and look at Google Earth and look at rooftops and exposure, and they would know fairly quickly what those sites that Chuck just described, which ones meet those criteria pretty quickly. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. Chuck, can you just reiterate how many panels are typically on a residential home, and maybe that would, for scale, you could see how many would fit on a typical building?
For the average size customer in RMLD service territory, the consumption is 9,500 kilowatt hours a year. And in order for a solar system to produce that, the panels are 300 watts apiece. So it takes 6.3 kW, 6,300 watts. That is 21 panels. So that is what you put on your roof.
There's a panel out in the lobby. It's about, I don't know, 4 by 5,
The panel in the lobby is 3 foot wide, 6 foot tall.
I have one other question. Clarification.
Colleen wanted to
Yeah.
add something.
Is the MLP incentive based on location? Meaning that if someone is not facing the right direction, does that decrease what they might get for the MLP incentive, or how does that work?
No, the incentive is paid based on the size of the project. The location will determine whether essentially a site is go, no go. So if it exceeds a certain rating threshold, if you will, then it would be a go site and it would be entitled to one. If it falls below that and it's not a go site, then it would receive no incentive, because we would not be interested in developing something that isn't going to produce.
Not residential. The MLP incentive on residential.
Oh, I'm sorry. The MLP incentive is also paid the same way. So it's a calculation that's done. There is, I don't know if it's on the Energy New England application site, but there is a model where the information is put in, and if it passes and it's accepted for the project, then you get the incentive. There's no derating of the incentive.
It's on the residential, right?
On the residential, and it would be on the municipal and commercial as well. If the project is a go, you get the incentive.
Go to the audience.
Jeff?
But I guess for the resident,
Just identify yourself first.
Jeffrey Coram.
Okay.
For the residential one, if you install it in a place that's shaded or you don't have quite the right angle, your payback time would be longer than the 7 years, right? Because you wouldn't be generating as much power. You'd get the rebate for the installation, but then you wouldn't pay off the rest of it as quickly, right?
That is correct. And it would be even longer if you decided to go ahead with the project and we couldn't justify paying the incentive because of the output quality at that location. So, yes.
Jeff, do you have a system at your house? I forget. No. Okay. Were there other questions on the municipal, and in that we could include the commercial side? Please. And just identify yourself and where you're from and what your affiliation is, if you could.
My name is Ethan Sawyer. I'm just a resident in Wilmington. But you had mentioned about municipal projects that the municipality either had to be the owner of the property or basically a tenant through a long-term lease. I just didn't know if maybe you could clarify that, what you would consider a municipal project if it was not municipally owned, but just they had a lease agreement.
The lease agreement would be for the solar system itself. Municipal property would be anything that the municipality owns. I'm not aware of any municipal property that are under long-term leases, but if the remaining life on a lease for a municipal property were over 20 years, we would be able to move forward with that. The lease part of what I was discussing is how the municipality would acquire the solar. So that instead of buying it outright, they would have somebody else build the project. Somebody else would take the tax incentive, and then the price of the lease would be discounted for the tax benefit that that third party got for building it. And I've worked with a number of solar installers that have recognized that component of a project structure. So I know that we can do municipal leases and get the tax incentive.
So Chuck, just to clarify something, I'm sure that's, let me
Might need to
understand.
speak up a bit, Phil.
Yeah, let me understand the question. If the municipal does not own the building, but they have a long-term lease, you'd have to deal with the landlord in that case, I would assume, and not the municipal.
Is that what your question was getting at? Yeah.
That had to do with if the municipality was actually leasing space from a third party, you know, if we
Right.
could do a municipal project with that municipality, if they just had like a 30-year lease agreement to use a building or a piece of land.
If the landlord was amenable to that, yes, it may be that the landlord would be able to install the solar as well. I don't have a good answer for that tonight without a lot more information
It might be
coming in.
could be a legal question that
Yeah.
needs to be looked at a little bit closer based on whatever site you have in mind. Yeah.
Are you aware of a specific municipal property that's under a long-term lease?
No, nothing right now. I know that Wilmington's looking at something having to do with hockey rink, you know, and we don't know exactly how they're going to structure that. So that's a lot of surface area on the roof that size.
It is, and it's flat. So that's something that we would work with the community on. So we would identify what the issues were and provide what support we can for that. The same as we would with any other customer that came in with that kind of a project. I don't think that we would pay the legal expense to get the answer, but certainly we'd help identify whatever technical issues were associated with a project like that.
Through the feasibility.
That would be part of the feasibility analysis, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, in a second. Just make sure. Is there any other questions about any like municipal or commercial projects and the comments that Chuck had? There was?
Get Vivek.
Oh, Vivek, who is,
So,
identify, I mean, you're on
okay, I'm Vivek Soni. I'm representing Linfield on the Citizens Advisory Board. You talked about the 15% limit set on each feeder. Could you explain what is the basis for that 15% on each feeder? And then I have a question about I have a follow-up question.
The 15% was a number that was established a while back by the Department of Energy simply as a conservative estimate as to how much solar any particular line on an electric distribution system could absorb before it started to notice voltage and current irregularities, issues with power factor. So as we look at each feeder, we will get an exact number for it. But right now, absent anything better, we're using the DOE 15%.
Okay, and so the follow-up was if you had, say, like a school or something else which becomes a large solar supplier, then how could that upset that balance?
Well, the first answer is it depends on where it is on the feeder. If it is very close to the substation at the early end of the feeder, it's easier to absorb it. The second is Hamid's team will do an engineering analysis and determine what the impacts of that are, how much energy is likely to flow back out onto the system at any point in time, and how...
I was just thinking, like, you talk about Linfield, you talk about Essex Street and being the end of the line, and Linfield High School is on Essex Street. And if they were to put something up there, then that would be something.
So I think, Vivek, we can get the answer on that specific site, certainly.
No, but the idea was just to see, like, how would that impact that 15%? So it was in the context of the 15%.
And if it was found that 15% was a good engineering limit on that particular feeder, what would happen is it would scale the size of the project back so that it stayed more internal to that particular facility.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
And I think, I mean, I looked at some of these numbers. There's a couple of feeders where this might be an issue, but almost everywhere in the district, if I'm not mistaken, we're far from these limits at this time. Like, yeah. Yeah, sure. This is Hamid Jafari, Director of Engineering.
Hi, I'm Hamid Jafari, Director of Engineering and Operations, basically responsible for keeping your lights on. Thank you. And the reliability system. Great, thank you. So the answer to that question is, yeah, there are some specific sites we might be able to generate more than what the feeder capacity is. That depends on the system. That's what we do per site system impact study. Meaning we're going to consider how much current can the system afford without impacting the what's called, in so technical term, I don't want to speak Greek, other languages, but that's basically the system impact studies done to see the number of harmonics, because harmonics are like power factor, like the foam on top of the beer. They're bad. They're sending to your lines, so it impacts, it distorts the sine wave, so it could impact the operation of your computers at home, your TVs, your other appliances that they're very sensitive. So that's why we do study and see what they could do, and then it is specific in some site we need to install specific protective devices in order to be able to, when it goes over the limit, to shut it off. So that's basically how we control that.
Are there any other questions with respect to municipal, commercial, or maybe we can move to the residential side, or are there others?
You had someone in the back. Someone in the back had their hand up.
All right, last question.
She's a residential.
Okay. Was that question about residential, or are we done with the municipal? Okay. I think we can probably move to that section. So so please come on up and identify yourself.
So I can project my
Please,
voice.
no, please.
Most people have been listening to
No, please, ma'am. I need you to come up to the podium.
in front of the video camera, no?
Please come up to the podium so that, I'm sorry to do this to you, but we want to make sure everybody hears you and sees you. Thank you very much.
So I'm just trying to understand.
Please, let's have just tell us your name and
Janice.
address and affiliation. From Reading? From
Reading.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just curious, step one, as a residential person, I work at a company where a lot of my fellow employees have already done this in Cambridge in their homes, and they just said, go to Energy Sage, and then you'll get 4 installers that will contact you, and so on and so forth. And I've been sent a set of instructions, and I understood you to say that that won't work because we're a municipal. And so I'm trying to understand, what is my step one? And after I understand, since you did talk about finding an installer, I still think that's close to my step one, is the feasibility and engineering check for line conditioning, beer foam, etc., going to happen for you, from you guys, using your time and energy and employees for each individual residential home? If so, is there a queue that's going to develop? And if I want the discount by the end of the year, I had better hurry my little self to the front of the line? Or, like, how does this work in very simple, basic, checkbox kind of terms?
Thank you. That's a great question.
Other people had the same question.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Is there anybody here that actually has a solar system installed? Perfect, okay? Correct me if I get this wrong and the process is updated a little bit. But your first step, contacting and getting 4 solar installers, is fine. It doesn't mean that those installers can't put the system on your house. If you plan to buy the system, or if you plan to lease the system, But if they come in and say they'll put the system in and they will sell you the output every month for 15% less, they're done. We can't use them in an MLP. So as long as you're buying the system, installing it on your roof, perfect start. Now, as to the rest of it, when you make an application, you will go to the Energy New England webpage and begin the application process. That is to apply for the rebate for your system. We will do the test. We will have that evaluation done that looks at where your system is, the orientation, and take a look at the total solar output as a percent of the potential. That passes, you're in line for a rebate. No, it will not be that long. Nope. Nope. We haven't done any yet. This was just launched about 2 weeks ago, but I can't imagine that it's going to take more than a week or two to process those. And if it does, give me a call. No, step one was to call your installers and find out, yep, they will do an evaluation of how much solar you need to serve your bill. They will get they will get 12 months of history. They will take a look at it and say, okay, this is how much you use, how much of your system, or how much of your use do you want to offset? They will size the system for you. Then you've got something you can take and fill out an application with. We would love to have the extra, but the rule is that you shouldn't build a system larger than your own need. We restrict it to people's own need. We don't.
I think what we ought to do is we ought to make sure there's clear information. If it's not already available on the website, there's a clear FAQ or primer that we can give out, because everybody's going to have the similar. These are great questions that you have. And I just want to make sure that everybody who has those questions can go to our website and get those answers clearly spelled out.
We can write them.
Yeah.
Maybe he can answer the question.
Yeah. The immediate question to why do we limit to your own consumption? And who's the we limiting? The we is RMLD. And the limit is there to protect the other ratepayers on the system. Because until we get some of the pricing issues resolved, you're generating extra beyond your own need, which is what the program was intended to cover, then forces other ratepayers into a higher cost structure for that. Now, if you want to build a much larger system and direct connect to the grid, we will buy all of the output from you. And we have customers that do that on larger scale projects. But for residential, the program was designed so that you could generate your own requirement. We will act as a bank for you. We've got to put cost structures in place so that we recover fair facilities charge and backup service charge for what we're providing. And once those are in place, everything's back to equitable. But the intent of the program was that people would be able to generate their own use, not that of the entire community. So,
other questions? Over here, and then John. Okay.
Thank you. I actually have a couple slides. Can I?
Sure. Can we do that? Can we?
We can work on putting that in if we want to take some other.
Yeah. Why don't we? Yeah. Why don't you do? Yeah. While he's putting that in, let's take another question. While the. Who else had a question? I saw a hand somewhere else.
They're all back here.
Okay. Sir, come on up.
Before you
Yeah.
do that,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure you're okay with this. We're not supposed to put flash drives that we don't know the origin of.
Well.
One of our RMLD systems.
Yeah, you're not supposed to put that in.
Well, I mean.
We have no idea
idea what's on it.
Okay, all right, if he can use his laptop instead, we can take a couple other, yeah. That's fine, okay, fine. Okay. You can't plug the AV into his laptop?
If you've got your own computer, we should be able to do that, because that's
Okay.
just an output.
Is that guy
Okay.
coming up?
That just goes
Sure.
into this.
Dave, you have that guy come up while this is...
Yeah, come on up and let's take your question while we figure out the technical piece here. And just identify yourself and town and affiliation, please.
My name's Dan Covey.
Yep.
I live in North Reading.
Yep.
I have solar on my home.
Yep.
Full disclosure, been in the solar industry about a decade.
Good.
So I'm up here to get a couple pieces of clarification from the presentation. And also, this all comes respectfully. I really appreciate you guys doing this. I think by the turnout here and just what I do in my day-to-day life, there's a lot of interest here. And I think we could do a lot better than our penetration is already, like you brought out. Sure. One of the points I wanted to get clarification on is that the way I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we do not have net metering in RMLD territory, the way net metering is defined. We have live bidirectional metering, which is a big difference on the financials. Meaning, all day long when you're at work and you're cranking out all this juice from your solar installation and you're not having consumption, you're selling back at a very low rate, the fuel surcharge. 4 cents a kilowatt hour right now. We all pay 18.5 cents a kilowatt hour. When you come home and the sun is not shining and you're consuming electricity, you're paying 18.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So that throws the financials off substantially. For the 45-55 split that you brought up, that brings that payback out to 11.5 years, not 6 years, unless I'm missing something with the math. So that's my main question is, can we get clarification on that? And independent of clarification, I hope that we're working towards something that's better than that. I understand that net metering is costly, but there's a lot of studies out there that say that, and I can cite them, that there's a net benefit for all ratepayers with net metering. Social benefits of the carbon offset, not new power stations that need to be built because of the electrification that we're promoting here. And also in other communities that are municipal light plants, like Concord, for instance, there's well over 400 residential installations. We have 4 communities here, and there's about 100. So we're definitely behind the 8 ball. And the part about the rebate, which I think is great, we have a year to chew up $500,000. At the average system size, that's about 50 projects. So I'm hoping that when that rebate ends, that RMLD can come up with something to continue solar adoption, because it's not going anywhere. Fossil fuels, there's a push against them for a lot of reasons, and I think if we don't, in RMLD, come up with something better, we're going to be behind the 8 ball about all of our neighboring communities. That's really my it's not really a question, I guess. There's more clarification.
Thank you very much for that comment. And one question I would like to know is how many of the municipal light plants have the type of payment structure that we have that you described, and how many have the Concord style approach. And that's an answer that I should know, and I would like to know it, and sort of know where we stand. So I don't know if we can answer that tonight, or it's just a question for us to be thinking about as a body in the coming months.
The cost information that I put up there at the 6.6 years does include using RMLD's buyback at the energy rate. The energy rate is the market energy offset price at 4 cents a kilowatt hour. The use of a net metering process, the way everybody understands it, same cost in and out, is not sustainable. If we did the entire system at that price, we would be out of business. We would have no money to maintain the facilities and provide that interchange service that all of the solar projects rely on. And since most of the energy that is being produced is in that bank, over 50% of it, as opposed to direct consumption by the consumers, maintaining that distribution system is an integral part of a successful solar program. keep in mind, we're consumer-owned. There's no profit that goes out of the system anywhere. So all we're doing is trying to balance equity, fairness, and maintain a cost structure that will sustain us well into the future while still meeting carbon reduction goals. We're currently negotiating with the state as to what those carbon reduction goals ought to be. And we're beginning that aggressive process of gaining non-carbon resources into our system, including the solar production. What will happen at the end of the year in terms of the rebate? We will go back to our original rebate structure. I don't have the numbers in front of me. It's a little less generous than the current state program is, but that is what we would revert to. And it would put us, save simple payback up towards where the commercial payback numbers that I put on the board are. So,
Chuck, just a,
I'd just like to add one thing to what Chuck had mentioned here. I'm John Stempeck on the board. And the point that we're basically cost effective as an RMLD, as a municipal light department, is very real. If you compare our rates, which I hope all of you have, with National Grid or with Eversource, you'll find that your rates are 1/3 to 1/2 of what they charge. I know because I personally have a property in another territory where I have National Grid, and it's about double what I pay there for the same amount of electricity as we would pay at RMLD. And that's because we pass everything along, all these cost savings, to all of us in the room, including all of us. And that's really what our focus is. We're a fixed cost organization. We cut to the bone in terms of our staff and everything else to keep this being just as efficient as possible for everyone. And that's why some of these numbers may be slightly off in terms of perhaps what others are paying. But that's the point.
One of our few jobs as commissioners is to set rates, and so I would like to understand, thank you, John, by the way, is to better understand where we stand in the spectrum of municipal light plants in the state on this question that just came up. And so, how many, Chuck, the question that I still have, whether we get it tonight or in the future, is how many of the light plants, where do we stand on the spectrum of our generosity, if you will, of treating the purchase power as we do with the 4 cents or versus the more generous Concord methodology? How many are in each camp, and where do we stand?
I can pull those statistics together. I actually pulled together about 8 months ago for my prior employer. So I'm familiar with where to find them.
Okay.
In terms of full service charge versus the energy charge, we're about on a par. I do know that other utilities don't offer an installation incentive for the solar up front, so the customers are bearing the full cost of the installation on that.
So in other words, maybe we're not so generous on that piece, but we are more generous. Okay, so it's just, we need to better understand it as a board, is my takeaway. Next question, thank you.
He's been waiting for a half hour. He's been waiting a half hour. I know. I mean, we've had too long on the municipal side.
All right, my name's Jim Greer. I'm very new in town, just moving into North Reading. I'm one of the few people who moved into this area who's paying more for electricity now because I live in Groton currently, which I think is second lowest in the state, also in MLD, of course. And Groton still remembers when Reading covered for us during the ice storm 12 years ago and saved our our lines.
Yes.
So I've been looking at putting solar on my house for about 20 years now. I'm a procrastinator. The cost has never quite been where it is. But I'm looking at it again, but I'm fascinated by the solar garden thing. It sounds like a way to bank the access without having to put my house, because my house, once again, doesn't quite face the way I'd really want it to face. It's great for looking at the water, but not so much the sun. And I got this wonderful tree. So, And so I'm very interested in that, but I'm also interested where you're at with storage, because I'm very much interested in what can be done with storage in the house. If I go to the split building, then I can, offset. I do have an electric car, so I'm sensitive to the overnight charging, but the peak rate during the day would hurt. So what's your thoughts on, the various battery technologies that are going on in the house as opposed to in your system, which I'm glad to see you've got the peak reduction batteries as well.
I'll give that to Chuck, but I just want to brag on RMLD a little bit in that we got the biggest grant in the Commonwealth for a grid battery that's been installed in North Reading, and that's something we're very proud of on the distribution grid. But as to the individual homeowner battery storage, Chuck?
Yeah. The project he's referring to, we put in a 5,000 kW, 10,000 kilowatt hour battery project. We got a $1 million grant from the Department of Energy Resources, DOER, for that project. We completed construction on it at the beginning of this month. It is commercially active, and we have a ribbon cutting for it next month. So we're kind of excited about having gone that way. Batteries are the key. You're right for a lot of reasons. One of the things, and I don't know where you are during the day, but if you plug your electric vehicle in between 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a sunny day, you will be reducing the amount of kilowatt hours that flow back out onto the grid for banking purposes and offsetting more of the energy that you would otherwise be purchasing from us. Okay, well, I'd say leave the car home, but I suspect you have it for commuting purposes. But and I'm going to be in trouble with the boss for having said that afterwards, because I'm not supposed to be discouraging electric sales. But we don't have economically functional batteries at this point. There is a product out there today, the Tesla Wall, that is available. It is a rack of batteries. I believe lithium-ion are the functional chemical mechanism for it. And I don't have an awful lot of information on the size of the packages and the cost effectiveness. I do believe there are a couple that are installed here on our territory.
I looked into this about a year and a half ago with Tesla wall-mounted batteries, calling Tesla and getting a quote on it for my house. A standard-sized house was about $37,000 just for the battery packs. Just for the battery packs.
You said 37,000, not 3,700, right?
That's correct. Yes, 37,000.
How many did you get, John?
Maybe it's new.
So he only got 2 of them. Wow. I thought they were $5,000 per unit or something.
They're big units.
Okay. So.
What is that? Year and a half old. Anybody has newer information, please. Yeah, go ahead.
That was an important enough data point. If you could, do you mind just come on? That way, everybody, there's thousands of people watching on TV right now. They're lined up. We have giant screens out on the street.
Wait a minute, Dave, it's the NBA draft. I don't think that's true.
So just give us your name and your.
Just looking.
Yeah.
So
just give us your name and your in town.
I'm Jaikiran Terry. I just moved to Reading like 6 months back.
Yep.
So yeah, the Powerwall cost about 7,800 per wall.
Okay.
So for and it serves about 4 kilovolt system. So if you are installing for 12 kilowatt system, you will need probably 2 to 3. So 14,000 to max 20,000.
So it's come down significantly.
Yeah, it's come down significantly compared to here.
Oh, plus the installation.
Oh no, installation is included.
Was included? Oh,
yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
So,
Do you know what the energy storage to battery size is? You said it was 4 kW.
4 kW.
How many kilowatt hours does that store? For example, I know we put in batteries that will in their configuration deliver 5,000 kW, but they will only do it for 2 hours, so it's 10,000 kilowatt hours. So for the 4 kW, how many hours of storage do you get?
So unless you use up all of that, so it doesn't tell how many hours of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I have a follow-up question on that. So does the rebate applies to the power wall as well?
Yes.
Does it?
Rebate applied to the power wall? No.
We haven't structured it that.
So does it just apply to the, so because federal rebate, the 30% tax rebate applies on the power wall itself too?
Okay. Is that a statement or a question?
No, that was a statement.
Okay.
The question is the RMLD rebate applies to the power wall.
No, we don't have one yet.
So he's asking whether...
$1.20 per watt is for the solar system itself.
Yep.
We do not have anything in place with respect to a power wall rebate at this point.
Okay.
But if that's included in the project, then the federal government would give the credit against that. So.
And that also would mitigate somewhat against the issue that was discussed earlier of the amount that we're paying during the day. Instead, you put it into your battery. So,
There's another question.
okay.
Please.
Sure. Well, come on up. Yeah, and then we'll get to John, who has a couple slides, I think. Yep. And
He's been chomping at the bit.
okay. So just let us know who you are.
Andrew Hikati. I work for Revision Energy in North Andover. One Powerwall is 13.5 kilowatt hours of usable storage. Your average household uses about between 21 and 27 kilowatt hours per day. Usually you put it into some sort of critical loads that you power, or you can go with 2 Powerwalls. So that's kind of how they work. It has 5 kilowatts, what you were referring to, 5 kilowatts of continuous output. So it can put out 5 kilowatts for 2.7 hours, which is that 13.5 kilowatt hours. So anyway, if anybody has any other questions about that, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you. And I think we had John Rogers had something he wanted. We've solved the technical issue. Hopefully, the hackers are not at work now.
I hope not. That's
the billing system. If you see very large bills from anyway.
Right. My name is John Rogers, and I live in North Reading, and I do work in energy. So I just wanted to give some context, follow up on what Dan said in some of the discussion here about where RMLD sits now. If you look at I think you mentioned 351 cities and towns in, that's a problem. Mine's not plugged into that. Actually, yeah, would you mind advancing? Okay, that's good. So if you think about those 351 cities and towns, I actually cut out the 3 largest because they just, Boston, Springfield, Worcester mess up the graph. But basically, you think about the number of households and the penetration rate. Next. So this is that distribution. This is what it looks like. So you see a lot of small communities that have pretty high rates of penetration of solar. Next, please. Those 4 red dots, one more, please. Those are us. Those are the 4 RMLD communities, so counting Linfield as an RMLD community in whole. But that's where we sit. And there are a lot of reasons. You heard we have more trees. Maybe we have, you think about owner-occupied versus renters. I think that would tilt things towards solar. Think about the lower cost of electricity in RMLD. That would tilt things away from solar. A lot of different reasons. But one more click. This shows other MLPs, all the other municipal light plants. So those 50, the other 46 communities in Massachusetts. So you can see that there are some that are up at 2%, 5%, even 10% penetration rates. Next, please. This is the average for the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, 5.6%, meaning 5.6% of the households have solar, roughly. These numbers are a little rough. The average across the municipal light plants is 1.1%, and RMLD is at 0.42%. So that suggests that even if there are issues with adoption, with penetration, with wires, whatever, we've got some running room here. Can you go to the next one? Here's another way of looking at it. These are all the communities. So you got one community that's up at 35%. Here, click again, please. Those are the RMLD communities there. One more click. Those are the MLPs, again, the other municipal light plants, so much like us in a lot of cases. And I'll just zoom in on those. Again, there are the MLPs, so low rates like ours. Communities, in some cases, very similar to ours, some very close to here. And here's where our 4 communities are. Again, so if you look at those 351 towns, we're not in the top 90-something% of those in terms of penetration. So this is terrific information. This is really important to hear. What Mr. Underhill was saying, we have opportunities. I think we could go a whole lot farther before we start running into some of the genuine issues that you would see. One more click. So again, if you think of us down there, one more click. The other perspective is to think about this from the customer's perspective. So we're worried about this being too rich for customers, solar adopters. Click, please. So if you think about how much gets exported to the grid. So we heard, I mean, you were saying it's good if they're exporting in the middle of the day, right? That's when the community needs it. One more click. It turns out that the economics, and there are some assumptions down here, but the economics work well if you, the homeowner, keep all the power to yourself. Because, and I was really glad to hear what you said about how we get compensated, but that's not how it's working for my system. Every kilowatt hour that leaves my house, not a monthly, not at the end of the month, the totaling, every kilowatt hour that leaves my house at any time of day, I get paid 5 cents, 4 cents for. When I buy it back 15 minutes later, it's 11 or 15 or 18 cents. And that's what these economics are based on. That's what my home system. So I love, and I think you're right, and I think that's the way the policy was written originally. That's not how it's being implemented. So I'd love to talk about that. So next click. So anything else, if you export anything to the grid, if you don't store it, if you don't use those batteries, if you don't consume it in your electric vehicle or your heat pump or your water heater right then, the economics really tank. Another click, please. And that's weird because we've got, how many of you got this email 2 days ago? Shred the Peak, that they're saying, please help us because things are really expensive at the expensive time of the day, and that heat. That's when our solar systems could be producing. Particularly a west-facing system like mine, late afternoon, that should be worth gold. And I get 4 cents a kilowatt hour for those at that export. So next slide. So if we want people to adopt solar, and that's why we're committing $250,000 plus $250,000 of the state's money, if we want to get people to adopt solar, we got to do something better. So it was worrisome to hear actually the talk about a facilities charge and going to a buy all, sell all, because I'll tell you, facilities charge is incredibly controversial in Arizona, which you referred to earlier. They really, I mean, pitchforks and torches kind of controversial. So I don't think, I mean, it's good to be thinking long term. Again, we're nowhere near, I think, where we need to be thinking about that. Next, please. RMLD has done so many good things. You know, early on, how many of you were in the Green Choice program where you could buy renewable energy? Yeah, Green Choice, I think it was called. There's the Solar Choice program now. There's electric vehicle incentives. There's efficiency incentives. There's the battery, the storage, all these things moving toward electrification. Rooftop solar, next, it should be part of that solution. It is part of that solution. RMLD has not embraced that yet, and it would be great to find a way to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Before we go back to you, is there any more questions? And then we'll take a couple. Okay, sure. Let's come on up and ask your question. Yeah, and while you're coming up, Tom O'Rourke's going to ask his question.
Yeah, just Chuck, thank you. Tom O'Rourke, one of the board members. Chuck, back to the original question. I want to make sure I got it right as to what the next step is. So get the installer, buy the equipment, apply for the application. That's what I thought I heard. And my only concern, maybe I'm missing something, so at that stage, once you purchase the equipment, if you do the feasibility and it's a no-go, are we stuck there, or maybe there's another part to the process? Maybe I'm missing that. So,
well, the feasibility and the determination of the rebate is the step after you select a supplier and evaluate the potential, but before you install the equipment. So you would have a choice based on...
Before you purchase the equipment.
Before you purchase it.
Okay.
You would be advised whether you qualified for an incentive based on the production capability at that location. So you would have a choice at that point whether you wanted to proceed with the project without the incentive, or whether, if you got the incentive, you'd go ahead and proceed with the project.
You wouldn't purchase the equipment until after you had the feasibility done?
I wouldn't, no.
All right.
And sir, just
Sure.
re-identify yourself.
Sure, Ethan Sawyer, Wilmington. I guess, this presentation that John did was, definitely had a lot of information in it. The one thing that I'm a tax preparer. When I work with my clients, most of the people who have solar on their homes, they're leasing it. They're not purchasing it because that $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 purchase price is scary. Even though I think that's the better way to go. But, so I think that the reason that the MLPs, the municipal light, are a much lower penetration rate is because of that. Customers here only have the option to buy, basically, right? So, I think that kind of throws the numbers off. That was the only point that I wanted to make.
Good point. Thank you for that.
Good input.
Cost payback is so much less because National Grid is double the cost.
When you say that they're leasing, are they buying the kilowatt hour output from a third-party vendor, or are they actually doing a lease, which is a fixed monthly payment for the system?
Go Solar or whatever it is, the solar company owns the panels, they get the SRECs, and then the customer just pays, instead of paying, National Grid $120 a month, they're paying this company $100.
That's currently a structural limit that we can't bypass. Part of what affects the cost effectiveness is that our kilowatt hour rates are lower than grid, so the offset is much different. We've been batting around 16 and 18 cents. Let me clarify what's going on with that. The 18 cents is the value of the bill that goes out from RMLD, but there's a prompt payment discount. Since 97% of our customers take advantage of that prompt payment discount, I think it's fair to reflect that in the sort of true cost of electricity. So that gets it down to a shade over 16 cents at that point. So I just want to be clear on that. One thing, and I'm not trying to sound defensive about this, but the solar choice option is there so that people who don't have those large upfront resources available can get into it. That does offset, though, the number of residential customers that are participating, because they're doing it through a different program that isn't counted as solar on the residential roof. So I'm just trying to be as fair and clear as I can. It's one of the reasons we do the Solar Choice program. I think that that opportunity should be reflected in, sort of where we sit. It's not going to move us to the top of the pile overnight, but I do think it's fair to consider all of the opportunities that we make available, and as I said at the beginning, why we make some of those things available.
Are there any more questions that haven't come up yet? One in the back there, please. Just let us know who you are, what town you're from, what affiliation. And,
I am Bob Bythrow from North Reading. Just a question as far as maintenance of these solar panels. Windstorms, snow, how do you take care of them, or do you take care of them? Or do you need insurance?
If they are behind the meter, it's either the leasing company that takes care of them, or you own them and you have insurance that takes care of them. It would be like any other appliance in your home. We're not responsible for the refrigerator, the washing machine, okay, maybe the dryer, but no, if you've got a panel set of panels on your roof, you're responsible. In addition, on the maintenance, it isn't just weather-related activities. You do have to watch for the holes that are drilled through the roofing material, whether it's sheet metal, rubber, or asphalt shingles. So those are often issues that you want to check after 2 years and every year thereafter to make sure that you don't have a problem developing on your roof.
Sir, you had a hand signal over here, and then we'll, yeah.
Hi, I'm Bruce McKenzie of Reading. Although the Reading power is very reliable, it can fail. And I was hoping that the rooftop solar could at least power my furnace and my refrigerator when the grid was down. We looked into this a few years ago, and there was no reasonably priced equipment that could disconnect the house from the grid. So I understand for safety reasons you don't want, you want to disconnect the solar panel. But is there any equipment that can still leave the house connected to the solar panel?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. The question is, in the event of an outage, will the solar system carry the house? And is there a way of doing a disconnect from the grid during an outage so that the solar can be used? That type of a structure is a double pole, double throw switch that you would use for a normal generator. So the equipment is available. The problem is that the inverters that come with the solar systems as a protective device de-energize and shut down the system in the event of loss of power. So the solar system in an outage won't carry your facility. You don't have AC signal to feed the solar system without the power grid. So it will also not function in a storm.
You need a battery. Yeah, you would need a battery.
Even with the battery,
Okay.
it won't function because it needs the synchronization signal from the grid to power the inverter. They've changed that now. That safety has been disconnected. Okay. Could you come up and explain that, please?
I also have a question. So
Please, yeah, come on up.
So yeah, the Tesla Energy Gateway will, for the Powerwall system, there's plenty of battery options. Will isolate from the grid, and your solar array can power your battery. It works almost exactly the way a generator relay works. So it isolates the grid, so you can't backfeed it, because that's the big danger here. And so these Tesla Powerwalls can do that. The Tesla Energy Gateway is the device that does that. As far as a question, you had mentioned, yeah, go for it.
Just one point of clarification. That is the interjection of a battery system. And I agree the battery will do it. But a standalone solar system without that Tesla wall does disconnect from the grid. So unless you put a battery system in, your solar system will disconnect and fail to operate. That is a safety mechanism that's put in. With the batteries, yes, you can do it. Okay, I just wanted to make that clarification.
And again, that's a safety thing. Like, you don't want people working on the lines and then backfeeding the grid and getting electrocuted.
Righto.
So, for the MLP rebate, you said that you size a system for their use. Can you size it for like future use? So, say they're the customer's planning to get a electric vehicle. Some of them have like some plans have like 120% of their current usage or something. Anyway.
I don't have a good answer for that right now. It's almost a case-by-case review on that. The program is basically you size it for your use. So if you demonstrate that you're on a Tesla waiting list, you've been on it for 2 years, you're expecting that in the next 8 months it's going to come off, we would probably allow for that. If you're going to buy an electric vehicle and charge it someplace else, that might be a little dicey. So I would say, we'll review it on a case-by-case basis. We're trying to encourage this stuff. Please don't get us wrong. We want to make sure that it happens. We just want to make sure that it happens so that it doesn't adversely impact other people on the system and still allows customers to develop what they would like to for their interests.
Any questions, sir? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Jim Conlon. I'm from Drake-It. I'm an installer, electrician. Couple of clarifications. One, sir, on the maintenance, you want to make sure that probably the most important maintenance item is your trees. You want to keep your trees cut back for shading and for squirrels. Squirrels will wreck your system faster than just about anything else will. It's nice and warm and cozy under there. And apparently they like the wires. So that's one. Two, if power goes down, there are systems that you can get some power out of. There's a type of inverter that when the grid is down, you can shut the inverter off, but there's a switch that you can get about 2,000 watts out of during the day when the sun is shining. So you could run your refrigerator, your freezer, something for those times. The linemen are safe, but it is an option. It's not used much, but it's available. So, thanks.
I'd like to ask a question about the inverter. Is that a second inverter that goes into a cutout, or is it the only inverter and it just switches its functioning capability?
No, it's a Sunny Boy. It's an SM. The SMA Sunny Boy inverters, they used to be the norm. They were the go-to for quite a while, and the last few years things have switched over with optimizers, and Solar Edge has become the norm. But I've been using SMAs now for special projects, and that's one of the functions of them that come in pretty handy. And it's the same, you're not paying any extra. So.
Any other questions?
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. I'm willing to learn too, so.
One quick one from John. You had your presentation, just a quick break briefly, and then maybe we'll...
Sorry, and I'll say I was flustered by the laptop issue. I did want to say thank you so much for doing this solar workshop. Again, you got a great crowd, great information. And to one of your last comments, I don't think we need to be at the top of the pack. I just don't want to be at the bottom of it or the back of it. So I think figuring out how to make it work for customers, both solar and non, recognizing the full value of solar, so it's more than the 5 cents a kilowatt hour that I'm getting for that power because of all the other issues that you brought up about transmission and distribution and all. Recognizing that value and integrating that into all the good things that RMLD is doing. So thank you, and I'm happy to be part of that conversation going forward.
Thanks, John. Any other... Okay, but one last question there. Maybe I think we're going to call it at 9 p.m. and I think we plan to do a 2-hour solar workshop. And so you can make the concluding remarks and sort of wrap up the lessons learned from tonight. Let us know who you are.
So my name is Peter Crocky. I'm a relatively recent Reading resident, also an engineer. So my question is actually a little more technical in nature. I was a little bit late. Could you explain for non-technical people what the issues are with phantom loads, and is this like the duck curve idea in California, or is this different? Could you maybe explain a little more?
It's something like the duck curve, and it would take me longer than I'm going to be allowed to explain what a duck curve is. But essentially, when you put a solar system in and you're providing for a portion of your load, especially when you're providing for it directly, we don't see that. We don't know what that is anymore. And we have to size the system to be able to deliver whenever somebody wants a kilowatt hour. We can't create a line. Okay, we're not like Market Basket that you can back people halfway up the aisles. somebody turns something on, they expect electricity. So that has to be provided. And for us, anything that is served by solar behind the meter is a load we're unaware of. So it is for us what I would call a phantom load. Does that, you're nodding your head, so thank you.
Everybody's good. I think we're very grateful for people for coming out. You know, we get very lonely up here a lot. We don't get too people they don't come, they don't write, they don't call, and here you all are. So please come back and keep the dialogue going. We have public comment at the beginning of every meeting, and happy to continue these conversations. You know, write to Colleen or Chuck. Really appreciate, and yes, and I just want to thank you guys very much for doing this.
So up next, not tonight, but an electric vehicle workshop coming, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and we have a big round of applause for Colleen and Chuck for doing. This was a bit out of the norm, and they spent the extra time, and I think we're all very grateful for that, and we'll look forward to keeping up the dialogue with everybody. So thank you very much.
Good. Drive safely.
Yep. And if you want to have the rest of the meeting, we have a few bids that we're voting on, and like minutes. We're going to approve minutes.
Chair, we take a 5-minute recess. Take a 5-minute recess.
And yes.
They change the room over.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Rotary, so we didn't. Good. Oh, good. Are you waiting for a Tesla? Because I saw you nodding when you were talking about Tesla. Are you waiting for one?
We wouldn't have any trouble.
Where do you live?
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
We keep talking
into
these microphones like we have.
Come here to charge your car. You don't do buy a Tesla.
Okay.
We're going to take a 5-minute recess.